Welcome to the Trails Around the World podcast. Each episode inspires you with a new idea for a long-distance trail or an adventure, someplace interesting in the world that you can discover. We tell you why you want to go and tell you how to make the dream a reality. This episode's guest has the trail name of Enigma. Enigma has hiked all three of the Triple Crown trails in the United States as well as the Pacific Northwest Trail. In addition to those 10,000 miles of famous trails, Enigma has been exploring lesser-known trails in other parts of the world. Enigma is going to tell us about the Transcaucasian Trail, which is still under construction in the exotic countries of Armenia and Georgia. Armenia and Georgia are in the Caucasus Mountains, which tower above the Alps as Europe's highest mountain range and form the border between Europe and Asia. Before we begin the episode, I would like to make one note. For about 18 minutes, there is a sound of frogs in the background. This starts at about minute 23, it gets stronger at minute 30, and then Enigma moved inside at minute 42, and that problem ended. Enjoy the interview. Hi, Enigma. Welcome to the Trails Around the World podcast. I really appreciate your taking the time to join us. Please introduce yourself, trail name, and what kind of hiking you've done, how you got into the hiking.
Sure, yeah. My name's Dylan Dice. My trail name is Enigma. I got that on the Pacific Crest Trail, which was my first through hike. It was back in 2015. And since then, I've hiked every summer, excluding this one so far, but obviously present conditions are not really allowing us out after it. But so 2015 I did the Pacific Crest Trail. 2016 I did the Appalachian Trail. 2017 I went out to Europe for a family reunion and ended up doing the Camino de Santiago via Jacobi Padensis in Francais, so that's Switzerland and France and Spain. So I went from Zurich to Santiago, which was about 1,500 miles in two parts. And in between the two parts, I went out to Eastern Europe to visit the Caucasus, which is what we'll talk about here on the show. And since then, in 2018, I did the Continental Divide Trail. And last year, 2019, I did the Pacific Northwest Trail from glacier to the coast. Got into hiking early, I guess. I was in Boy Scouts, so that had me out on trails and with a backpack on at an early age. I did a couple of boundary water trips up to Ely, Minnesota. I did Philmont as well, down in New Mexico, Arizona. I forget where it is. Philmont, the big scout camp down there. But yeah, I just I think I got into it again because my ex-girlfriend wanted to hike, and I said, yeah, that sounds like fun. So I got on trail and it got in my blood. Can't stop.
Yeah. What about it makes you love it?
Oh man, the community is a big part of it. I think one of the main parts of it is the hikers that you meet while you're on the trail, the trail angels and the support network around the trails. People like yourself that set up interviews and get excited about it, the people you meet in the grocery stores and the hostels that just, get excited about the freedom that you're living. That's I guess another part of it is it really does feel like freedom to be out in nature at your own pace, kind of confronting the wild and the variables that are thrown at you and putting your body to the test. I think that's a big part of it. Nature itself, just the allure of being out in the wild, in the wilderness. Society is kind of cumbersome, so it's nice to spend day and night as long as you can away from that and reconnecting with the, I don't know, the root of
Right.
of experience of the natural way of being, or close to it,
Right. And so before you were Before 2015, were you doing any sort of outdoor adventuring? You spoke about growing up and going to Philmont and the border boundary waters and that sort of thing. But between those times, were you doing adventuring or were you involved in other stuff?
Yes and no. Let's see, I went to college from 2004 till off and on till 2010. I went to Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington,
Mm-hmm.
which is a liberal arts college that you get to kind of create your own major. I ended up writing in natural processes, so I've always been drawn towards natural things. What that means is I was studying geology pretty heavily, which obviously will get you out in the fields pretty frequently. And I was also studying ecoagriculture, permaculture, biodynamics, how to grow things, and a bunch of other stuff. But that kind of does the gist of it. And so there was some adventuring involved. I did a year abroad in New Zealand and went out to Southeast Asia for a year after that. I was gone for 2 years and did quite a bit of hiking while I was in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, Cambodia. And I spent the last 4 months in Nepal and India and Tibet. So it was, I mean, that's almost all foot travel out there.
Yeah.
And was studying geology as I went, collecting minerals here and there and visiting mine sites and getting guides and going into places kind of off the beaten track. So yeah. And then after college, for the 4 or 5 years before I started through hiking, I was working on a farm out in eastern Washington, a couple of farms. So
Right.
was just doing seasonal employment and spending spring, summer, fall on the farms, and then the winter in the ski industry.
Right. So tied to the outdoor world the whole time.
Definitely. Yeah.
When you were in Nepal, I was there about the same age you were, but it was more decades ago.
Sure.
And my experience was that most things led back to trekking because at that time, many of the roads that are there now hadn't been built yet, and so transportation was by foot.
Right.
How much is that still the case in Nepal?
Well, the year I was there was an interesting time to be there too. It was right as they were finalizing their election process and trying to do a democratic thing. So there was some political upheaval, but also the road that went up to the Mustang Valley, which is now well established, was just coming to completion. So there was light traffic going. I did the Annapurna circuit as part of that trip, and that the road goes from Tatapani basically up to the Mustang Valley to Marfa, the next town up the valley from Marfa, and then there's an airport there. This was where the avalanche happened in 2015.
Right.
And so yeah, that was brand new. There were people trying to drive it, but it was still pretty rugged. Besides that, there were some. It's still just a lot of foot travel. People are walking to get to their villages. You can only drive so far, and then you gotta strap on the packs, and the Sherpas are still very active, getting things from point A to point B, and mule trains, constant traffic with the mules and the yaks, and yeah. I was there 2008, so this is a little dated as well.
And we're here to you and I originally made contact over the Pacific Northwest Trail, but both of us were interested in talking about the Transcaucasian Trail.
Yeah.
So for the listeners, can you describe what the Transcaucasian Trail is?
Sure. It was started as a kind of idea project, separate from two different people. Tom Allen, a Brit, was in Armenia, and he is an explorer and a bike packer, and does a lot of amazing stuff. And he had a vision to do sea to sea, or at least Armenia, to be able to put the foot trail together to get across Armenia. And at the same time, Paul Stevens up in Georgia was having similar visions of doing a cross Caucasian, the upper Caucasus, the big mountains up north, and was envisioning doing a long distance route up there. So somehow they found each other, and the Transcaucasian Trail organization was built up, and they started getting funding and things. So the vision is to create a 2-corridor linked system. The northern corridor would be a sea to sea along the greater Caucasus through Georgia and Azerbaijan. And the southern corridor would be from the Black Sea to the river Arax in Iran, or on the Iran-Armenian border. It might in time go into Iran and connect to the sea too. There's a lot of border to border problems to solve. There's 3 different regions that are contested regions. Armenia does not get along well with Azerbaijan or Turkey. Georgia doesn't get along with Russia. Like there's some troubleshooting to figure out to make it a fully continuous trail, but they're working hard to get that done. So as it stands, they've got about 500 kilometers built up over the last 4 years. I guess they started 2016 kind of doing the route planning, and then 2017 was the first year that they had volunteers out and started getting the locals involved in actual trail construction. And at this point, there's a little over 300 kilometers in Armenia that are fully constructed, and a little over 200 up in Georgia that are done. And they're doing about 100 kilometers a year. They get 25 to 30 international volunteers, and they employ about the same amount of locals in each region, north and south, each summer. This summer is different, clearly, because of travel restrictions. They will be doing work this summer, but just the locals. They won't be having any international workers. They're still looking for international support. You can check the website to help donate there, but it's going to be a little slower process this year, but it's still happening, and it's a long-term vision. Hopefully the next 10, 20 years.
Yes,
it comes with time. It takes time. So
right. So how many long distance segments are in existence, I guess, right now? And of course, this is changing every year.
Sure. I'm not necessarily the right one to ask that question. As far as I know, there's a loop around Dilijan, Armenia that's totally done. I think they've connected that to the north to Vyadzor and further north, and then the Gangnam Range up by Lake Savan. I don't think they've put trail in. It's very open up there. It's a strange volcanic landscape that's high alpine. There's no trees. It's just grassland and volcanic craters and rises here and there, and old volcanoes. Nothing current, nothing active. But I don't know if that's completed and marked yet. But further southeast, it eventually connects to the Janapar Trail, which goes through Nagorno-Artsakh.
Karabakh.
Yeah, and there's 3 different names for that area, and that's a contested region. That's one that if you go to, you have to kind of keep it on the down low if you're trying to get into Azerbaijan, because I mean, Azerbaijan and even Google Maps say it still belongs to Azerbaijan, but it is definitely occupied by the Armenians. And to go there, you need to get a visa, either in the capital there or in Yerevan, the capital of Armenia. Mm-hmm. So that trail was done in the 80s, maybe early 90s, and it's 200-kilometer trail
Hmm.
that's both bikeable and hikeable. And while we were out there, we rerouted it, did a bunch of maintenance on it, put up new trail blazes. It's well established now. It's made it onto Gut Hook. John Bollinger, who was an Armenian American, spent some time with the Gut Hook folks and properly routed it and got it submitted. So you can download the
Right.
uh,
And that's the Janapur Trail?
the Janapar Trail. Yep. So
Janapar,
that
okay.
the TCT overlaps with that, and then kind of swings back around towards Iran, further south
And you said
from
the
there.
Janapar Trail does go through Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh? Or?
Yes, it's primarily and only in Artsakh-Karabakh.
I understand. And then up in Georgia, do they have a couple of long distance segments yet?
Right. Yes. Let's see. It took me a week. I'm a fast hiker, so I think when they've taken groups up there, it's a 10-day excursion from Mestia to Ushguli,
Mm-hmm.
and connected to the roads further south and west to get all the way to Batumi on the Black Sea, which is what I did. I started in Mestia and walked westward all the way to the sea.
And
So
Mestia is in the mountains in the
it's up there. It's the
western
end of
part
the
of the
road.
country.
Pretty much the end of the road up an old Soviet road. They put a dam in. It looks so much like the Cascades. I can't even begin to explain how similar it is to like the North Cascades. But yeah, and Ross Lake up there. They put in a dam, the Soviets, when they were in the region before the USSR fell apart, and they put in a road and a hydroelectric system up in Mestia. And I think there's another dam up there as well.
Right.
And then there's some more kind of sketchy roads up there. There's two ski resorts, one of which became quite famous a couple of years ago for a lift failure, a big rollback. Anybody in the ski industry has probably seen it because it's absolutely horrifying. But it's a beautiful place to ski. I would imagine it'd be pretty awesome. But yeah, the road ends, and I think they're presently working on putting more trail in going east.
Right.
And as far as those sections are concerned, I don't know what the progress is. I think they've walked some of it and done some exploration, but from there, and definitely in the Azerbaijani section, that I don't think they've really quite figured out what to do over there. There's that other South Ossetia is another region that's
right.
contested. Yeah, Russia claims it, Georgia claims it. So, and Russia's staged in it right now. So they're going to either have to go around or work something out with the Russians. So
I mean, I lived in Georgia for 2 years, 20 years ago. So a lot of this is familiar. Mestia was pretty much off limits. And,
really?
Oh yeah, that's in Svaneti, right?
Yes.
Yeah, 20 years ago you did not enter Svaneti, and
Okay,
I
I guess I
understand
heard it was pretty dangerous some time ago.
it was, and now there is no problem, from what I understand.
It felt very safe, and there were a lot of international tourists, a lot of Russians and Scandinavians, Americans, Canadians. I mean, it's pretty well established touristy place at this point.
That's wonderful, and it is. I mean, it was a very isolated place even 20 years ago.
Sure.
I couldn't go there. Nobody did, and those who did didn't necessarily come back. So
well, you'll have to get back up there. It's breathtaking. It's absolutely outstanding. The only mountains I can think of that compare to those northern reaches, Ushba, and some of the big peaks along the border. I mean, it parallels the Alps and the Sierra Nevadas. Those mountains are impressive. Giant granite peaks covered in snow. It's beautiful up there.
So that was going to be the next question: is what makes the Transcaucasian Trail special?
Oh man, so much. The landscapes, you have a large variety of landscapes, from the granite peaks to the north, to the lush forests closer to the Black Sea, to the dry, arid southern Armenia regions, and Dilijan and central Armenia is its own kind of alpine forests, thick forests with tons of conifer trees and deciduous trees that go crazy in the fall. I mean, it's breathtakingly beautiful. What else makes it special is the culture itself, the diversity of cultures. Like you said, it being so isolated for so long, there's 50 plus dialects of Georgian and Russian spoken. I mean, and Armenian. There's just a very rich culture, and it's a very hospitable culture. People will invite you in every day to eat with them, to come talk with them, even if they can't speak the language or you can't speak the language. And you will be drinking vodka a lot up in the high country, at least in Armenia, I believe in parts of Georgia too. The Yezgeti are nomadic people similar to the Bedouin, and they're shepherds and animal herders, goats and sheep and cows, and they're kind of stateless. They have no specific region that is their own. They travel with the seasons, and they don't have much, but what they do have, they want to share. That they are always calling you over to come sit down and eat some tomato and cucumber and salty cheese with them, and drink and drink and drink.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hospitable. In Armenia, you have the old Christian infrastructure and also some Moorish influence. It was conquered for a time, but Armenia was the first country to accept the teachings of Jesus. So from a very, very early time, there were monasteries being built, and this sense of do unto your neighbor and respect thy fellow man kind of, and it stands to this day. And so do some of the monasteries and the churches. You'll find them in the jungle. They're 1,000+ years old, being eaten by the jungle. Some of them are well kept, but it's a pretty impressive place, just all around. A mix of culture, of beauty, of everything. I don't know what else to say.
Right. And yeah, I mean, you're describing the scenery and the terrain and that sort of thing. How does it compare to other places? I mean, you have one of the most distinguished hiking resumes one could have, actually. You've done the Triple Crown Trail in the Triple Crown Trails in the US. That alone distinguishes you. But you've also been in the Himalayas and Europe. And so how does this compare to those other places?
It compares more to the Himalayas than anything else, just from the sense that there is a sort of old infrastructure. People are still walking and moving the herds from place to place seasonally. And so there's these paths, and it was part of the Silk Road network for a long time, when goods were moving from Europe to the Chinese Empire. And so there's these networks that are older than anything we have in the States, no doubt about that. But it's kind of forgotten by time. It's being rejuvenated, but it's old, and the only thing that can compare to that is the Himalayas, from what I've seen. There is some comparison to be made to some of the trails out here, just in the sense of landscape.
Out here being
the U.S.
Okay.
Any of the Triple Crown Trails, it pulls a little from any of the Appalachian Trail, the Continental Divide Trail, the PCT. Of course, you're not going to be seeing the amount of other hikers out there, but it's, as far as the landscape goes, you'll be working through forest tunnels. You've got incredible ridge walks. You've got granite peaks. You've got rivers to cross. You've got roads that'll get you into town. You've got trail towns that you can resupply and pick up resupplies. You don't really ever have to carry food for more than a couple of days.
Yeah.
So there's some similarities in that sense. They know what they're doing. The Tom and Paul have both done their fair share of hiking and exploring as well. So
Right.
they have a good sense of what a long distance trail embodies.
Right.
And they're also really trying to get the local villages involved, setting up tea shops,
Mm-hmm.
guest houses, so that there will be kind of an infrastructure for long distance hikers to
Right.
have a place to stay, to get a shower, do some laundry, and go to the village store and re-up on food if need
Right.
be. So
Right.
that's part of the vision for sure.
Yeah. And so how many of you were hiking together generally?
Well, I was hiking by myself entirely. When I was out actually hiking, it was just me. I did not do the entirety of any of the routes. I did a good amount of the Janapar route, and I did an exploratory hike from Dilijan along the established route that Tom had set up by GPS coordinates. I was following his coordinates until I got to the Georgian border, and then I veered off onto my own trail to connect to Tbilisi.
Mm-hmm.
So I was doing some route finding to see if there was an option to hit a couple of the big lakes in southern Georgia and then get into Tbilisi and connect a route that way. They've scrapped my data. It wasn't the right vision, the right way that they wanted to go with it. But so when I was hiking, I was by myself. I also did 2 weeks worth on the trail crew. And when we were working on the trail crew, there were, I think, 20 of us,
Mm-hmm.
about 10, 15 internationals and 10, 15 Armenian young people that were involved. And some of whom were there the entire season and have continued with the project for the years since. Others who just were like the internationals, came for a week or two and then decided it wasn't for them.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to say that the year that I was out there was a thru hiker that did the entirety of the southern route, and he did the route from the Iraqi border all the way up to Batumi on the Black Sea on foot the entire way. Since then, I think the following year there was a woman, the first woman to do the entire southern route, and she's an American. And then there was a British guy, I believe, last year who was able to do that full southern route too. So now there's 3 people that have done the full through hike.
Uh-huh.
Again, I didn't do it all, but I tried to do everything that was built at the time, as well as some of the route finding.
Right. What?
I do want to
go on, please.
I do want to put out a note as far as the route finding was concerned, and all of us had to deal with this. There's no maps up there, at least nothing current. The maps that we all had to use, they're Russian maps that were charted during World War II, when the Soviets were trying to map the entirety of the USSR. So these maps, the dates on the maps were 1942. They were good for the topography, sure, but it was all in Russian. I don't read Russian. I don't think any of us read Russian. Some of the roads had long since disappeared. They're, following Jeep tracks that's on a map from 1942. It's numerous times I was bushwhacking through nettles up to my chin, and the track's down there somewhere, maybe, but it's been a long time since it was maintained. I ended up getting to the border in the wrong place. I got detained for a while. That's its own story. Ended up being twice in the same day.
Which border was that?
The Georgia-Armenian border. Luckily, one of the safer borders to be detained on. And the first time I was detained, they gave me coffee and cookies, and we looked at our maps and tried to figure out where we were, and they kindly let me go. The second one wasn't so good. They held me for quite a bit longer, and I ended up having to get escorted for a distance with guys fully armed, and nobody spoke each other's language. It got a little tense for a while. They were also trying to get me to smoke weed with them, and I was like, yeah, not gonna happen. I don't think that's gonna. I feel like
Not
this
a
is
good
a trap.
idea.
Yeah. So yeah, that was an interesting day, but ended up working out okay. But yeah, the maps are there's an Italian map maker who was working hard to try and put together some more updated maps, and he's done a great job for the Armenian section. He's got the route around Dilijan well mapped, and I think they're on their third version of that map, and that's available through their website and through some of the local businesses in Dilijan. And I think he's very involved with Tom and the Armenian crew, and trying to keep up with what they're doing and get it onto updated current maps.
Right. Are those maps by the Italian related to that app that they have? And is that Hike Armenia or Transcaucasian Trail that has the app?
It would be Hike Armenia is the app that has all of the trails. I don't believe Transcaucasian Trail has an app set up yet, but they are working with Hike Armenia, and that's a free app that you can get with all of, not just the TCT, but all the short hikes and fun hikes all throughout Armenia. And yes, I believe Alessandro is working with them as well.
Right. What is the best season for doing this? You were only there during one season, I assume, but
that's a great question, though. Summer, fall would be both outstanding. Definitely for the northern route up in Georgia, you'd want to be there in the summer months, so June, July, August.
Right.
It's a short weather window, very similar to any mountain region. The snows stay late and come early. So,
right.
But in Armenia, it gets hot in the summer. So the middle of the summer might not be the best time. Spring is, from the pictures the friends I've kept from out there put from their hikes in the spring. I mean, the wildflowers are outstanding, and there's species of plants out there that are only found in that part of the world. So if you're a plant lover, springtime's the way to go. It gets very colorful in the fall, so a late season would not be a bad time to be there either. August, September, October.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it looks like the East Coast of the United States in the fall. It goes full fall foliage with the oranges and reds and yellows and saffron, turmeric, everything. It's pretty amazing.
How did you end up in the Caucasus doing this trail?
That's a great, yeah.
How did you hear about it?
Yeah, I heard about it from a thru hiker that I met kind of serendipitously on two separate hikes. I met him first on the PCT in Kennedy Meadows. It's the jumping place, jumping point as you're going north to get up into the Sierras.
Right.
So it kind of, people hang around and it stacks up and it's a big party. When I was there were probably 30 or 40 other hikers, and I got to talking to this older gentleman, and he was from Spain, and was kind of an interesting guy. We ended up chatting it up quite a bit and going our separate ways. He left several days before me, and he was a fast hiker, so I didn't end up catching up with him again. But the following year on the Appalachian Trail, I went southbound, and I got out of the 100-mile wilderness, and in Caratunk, there's nothing to Caratunk but a river crossing, a recreational place that's got like boat rentals and a restaurant, a tiny little bed and breakfast. That's it. And I was at the bed and breakfast, went to the restaurant to get dinner, and I saw the Spaniard, this guy that I had met on the PCT. And so I pulled up a chair with him and said, "Hey, I know you from last summer." He's like, "Oh yeah, I remember. We met in Kennedy Meadows. Yeah, let's have dinner." So we ended up eating. He was going northbound, so we were just kind of crossing paths. He was finishing up his hike. I was just starting. But at that point, I knew that the following year I would be going to Europe for a family reunion to France. My mother's side is from France. So I knew that I'd be going out, and I decided to pick his brain, him being from Spain, to see what he knew of good trails to hike in Europe. And I don't know how he found out about the Transcaucasian Trail, but he was the one that mentioned it. he told me about several of the GR routes. We talked about the Camino. He said, "Don't hike the Camino; it's too crowded. You're gonna hate it." I was like, "Well, I'll find that out for myself, thanks." But he didn't recommend it, but he did recommend the TCT, or from what he had heard about this new trail being built in the Caucasus, and it got put in the back of my mind. You know, I added it to the list of things to check out, and when I finished the AT and started doing research in the wintertime, I got on their website and saw that they were looking for a trail crew and were welcoming people to come be a part of it. So I got in touch and ended up going out there for the better part of 2 months. It ended up being 2 months, yeah.
Yeah. Did you follow up on any of his recommendations concerning the GRs or Grand Randonnées in France?
I sure did, yeah. I don't know if he recommended the Via Padenses. It's one of the French routes, or if I just kind of figured that out via my own research. But he did put in a good word for the GR20, the Grand Randonnée 20, which is the one that goes north-south along the island of Corsica.
Right.
And I did get a chance to go check that out very briefly. I did not hike it. I will, if I can, someday go back for that one because it's awesome. But when I finished my Camino, the first stage of my Camino, I started in the middle of France and went to Santiago. And when I finished, I decided I'd go to Corsica to hang out on the beach and relax and rest before going to the Caucasus, which I did a little bit of, but you can't stop a through hiker, especially when you've got your legs. And
Right.
So I ended up getting on the train that goes east-west across the island, and it has a station on the GR20. I can't remember the name of the village, but I got off the train on that village and did a 3-day out and back. So I
Right.
spent 2 nights, 3 days on the GR20 and just kind of went up, checked it out, and went back. I was on a time restriction, or I would have tried to be up there longer. But it's rugged and it's beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah.
GR20 is pretty amazing, and there are a number of YouTube videos that show the terrain so that anybody can get a quick idea of that. There is some cheeping in the background. Do you have any idea what it is?
Yeah, the peepers. I'm in Western New York, and the sun just went down, and yeah, the frogs are doing their thing. I've got a toad staring me down like a foot away at this point.
That's great.
The peepers.
It's a natural sound. We're going to go with it.
Yeah.
That's not the answer I expected. On
the
Transcaucasian Trail, what cultural or historical factors? Now you've discussed, of course, there are political strains or sensitivities to be aware of, and those are actually fairly well documented, and one could go on the U.S. State Department website and get a pretty good idea of them.
Sure.
I think the British also have a good website in that regard. But other cultural or historical factors to discuss?
Like I mentioned, the origins of Christianity are to be found in Armenia especially. They in fact have their own block of the Holy City in Jerusalem. You've got the Christian quarter, the Muslim quarter, the Jewish quarter, and the Armenian quarter. They have their own quarter out of respect for the fact that they took Christianity first and spread the word. So you've got that sense, and it's ingrained. It's well ingrained. The culture reflects it. The infrastructure, the architecture. I mean, it's all there. It's also interesting to find, especially like closer to Karabakh and some of the and southern Armenia, you do get the influences of Islam. Some of the like churches, the steeples at some point were knocked down to put up a minaret, and then were knocked down again to put back up a steeple, kind of thing. And I remember finding one church that was built in, I think, 900 AD, that it was a Christian church, but then you walk around to the side of it, and on the back side of one of the Hajkars, there's the Hajkars too, they're these intricately carved stone crosses, basically. They look like gravestones, large gravestones, but
Mm-hmm.
they do mark as gravestones, but they're also like waypoints and historical places. They've got a lot of different uses, but they're fundamentally a cross with a lot of just intricate stone carving that almost resembles Celtic knotwork. It's just this really beautiful interwoven patterns behind these ornate crosses carved in sandstone. So yeah, this church that we found close to Karabakh, you walk around the side of it, and behind the Hajkar, there's goat heads and chicken legs and stuff hanging off of the window. Very, very pagan. And there is a sense of bioregional animism that's happening, and after asking around, we found out that those were offerings left to Jesus as thanks for the villagers' children coming home from the border dispute. So
Hmm. Huh.
it was kind of a ceremonial offering with the Christian basis, but
Right.
also not. So yeah, really kind of interesting stuff. There is a lot of the Soviet infrastructure that's really quite fascinating, because it really does look like they just dropped everything when the USSR fell apart and left. And from what I know, that's pretty much how it happened. It was a period of just a couple of years, but everywhere you go, you find these massive building projects that were started but never finished. And they've been sitting there for 40, 50 years, some of them. And it's just like, and some of it is completed. You'll get into some of the more established towns and cities and villages, and there are the buildings that look very Soviet bloc, concrete housing. And then, yeah, some of it's just ruins, essentially, like
Right.
modern day ruins. Yeah.
So, what sort of shelter did you have while you were hiking? What alternatives were available, and what did you take advantage of?
I was carrying a tent and used it frequently. At the time, I was carrying the MSR Hubba NX, the Hubba Hubba, rather, the 2-person one. So I was using that predominantly. Even on the Camino, I was one of the less than 1% of the hikers on the. Yeah, not a lot of people on the Camino use a tent. I was one of the few that, I mean, I had it, and I had brought it because I was intending to use it in the Caucasus. And
Right.
I did use that. I was invited in several times to villagers' houses and slept on cots, and they would invite. It would be getting late, and they'd call me over, and we'd have dinner, and then the vodka would start pouring. So we'd end up. I didn't want to go anywhere, and they'd offer a bed. So that was fine. I was using the Transcaucasian Trail's headquarters as kind of a base unit, a place to jump off from.
Is that in
They were
Tbilisi or?
they had 2 headquarters. There was one for the Georgian crew and one for the Armenian crew, and I
Right.
was using the Armenian place for headquarters, and that was based in Dilijan.
Oh, okay.
The Georgian one was at the time in Mestia. I believe it still is.
Wow. Okay.
I think they had to move locations. Both places had to move locations, but they've kept it to those regions or those areas.
Uh-huh.
So that was pretty much the lodging situation. Like I said, with the vision of the project, they are starting to get more and more guest houses set up along the routes. And I know that in the last 2 years since I've been there, that there has been connections made with some locals, that there is a little bit more infrastructure set up as far as lodging is concerned.
So, how was it using a tent? Did you tend to ask permission, or did people bother you at all, or?
I was never bothered. No, I tried to ask permission if I could. Most of the time, there was just nobody around. I'd set up on the edge of a field or in the forest somewhere, and I don't know. I have a through hikers technique as far as stealth camping is concerned, I hike until it gets dark. I set up my tent once it's dark, and I'm broken down before it gets light.
Right.
So people won't see me.
So what you said you stayed in some houses. Did you stay in any other structures that were interesting?
There are caravanserai that people have used. I know Val spent the night in a couple of them. Caravanserai are old buildings that were built during the time of the Silk Road.
Mm-hmm.
They were places for the caravan where people to stay for a night, usually very similar to some of the hospitals along the Camino, where it was they'd have a bed to sleep in, and they could pay a very marginal amount for some food, and then be on their way. And some of those are still out there, and people do stay in them. They're old and not well maintained, so you might be sleeping with snakes, and you might have a stone collapse, cave in. But Val had no problems. I've not heard of people having problems. I stayed on the backside of one of the churches in Dilijat National Park. They have a campsite set up for the TCT hikers,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe there are a couple of places like that you can stay on the old church grounds or close to them.
You said you took the Hubba Hubba with the intention of using it in the Caucasus. What other preparations did you make for doing this? Equipment that you used and that sort of thing?
Pretty much my regular through hikers kit.
Mm-hmm.
I carried almost everything. With some exceptions, I added more than I took away. I was traveling with a stove, though I very rarely used it. It was mostly just eating what the locals eat, which is salty cheese that carries and preserves well, and dried meats, cucumbers, maybe tomatoes. If somebody gave me one in the day, I'd hold on to it for dinner, kind of thing.
Yeah.
A lavash is a very typical Armenian bread. That's a flat bread, flatter than tortilla. It's a well-known
Right.
bread type. Georgia, they had breads that were easy to find, and fresh produce, and crackers and cookies and biscuits in a lot of the small village stores that traveled well. As far as the rest of the gear goes, I was, like I said, with those maps earlier, I was traveling with a map set that I had printed out in Yerevan, which is a rather large map set. I had to carry all my paperwork, visa information,
Right.
passport, travel insurance, all that kind of stuff that you kind of got to deal with international stuff. So I had a pretty thick paper bundle that was kind of weighing me down a bit, but necessary.
Yeah. How did you find water? Was that an issue?
No, very much not an issue. Fresh water. Well, it's interesting because Armenia for sure, and I'm not so sure about Georgia, but Armenia doesn't have a trash system. They don't have landfills. They don't have a trash collection organization at all. So people are dumping everywhere. It's almost third world bad. It's everywhere you go, you just find plastic and junk, and it's starting to fill the rivers and the creeks. And so flowing water is not really to be trusted. However, they tap the springs, and again, you'll find hachkars. They're beautifully tapped springs, and almost anywhere you go, and on the old maps, on the new maps, along the roads, along the paths, they will put a piping system into the spring and pipe it out and have beautiful ornate stonework around it, and everybody uses those for fresh water. And so I was carrying a Sawyer filter, and I used it, but I saw a lot of the locals that would just fill up straight out of the spring and drink it straight, and we're not getting sick. So I think those marked springs, and they probably have a name for them that I'm my ignorance is showing there, but they're beautiful and delicious and cold, fresh spring water. Yep. So that water was not an issue too much. And like I said, I had a filter. I always have a filter. Always carry water treatment when traveling, but it wasn't an issue.
Yeah, and you were able to find food along the way.
Yep.
What is your, and this of course would vary according to climate and whether you're in a place like the U.S. where you don't need documents and such versus an international situation. But what is your base weight generally like?
It's usually 15 to 25 pounds.
Uh-huh.
In internationally, when I was traveling, it usually ranged 20-25,
Right.
kind of more on the heavier end. When I'm hiking out here, it's definitely sub 20.
Right.
But I do not get into the single digits. I'm not quite. I've never claimed to be an ultralight hiker. I'm a lightweight hiker, but I'm not ultralight. I'm not there. I
Right.
don't really want to be. It's too expensive.
It is expensive. Well, and if you're going into a situation like the Caucasus where you hadn't been there before, then obviously you're going to take precautions that weigh something.
Yes.
The hubba hubba tent being a good example.
Yep. Good to have space.
Yeah. What are those, 2.5 pounds or something?
Yes, under 3, but it's
Right.
actually with poles and fly, I think they're a little just over 3.
Right. So where can others learn about this trail or these trails? Best books or
The
maps?
Transcaucasian
Uh-huh.
the Transcaucasian Trail has a website. It's pretty simple, transcaucasiantrail.org.
Mm-hmm.
It's got some good basic info, and definitely info on the plan and how you can get involved with it, how you can help support it both financially, and if you're interested in going out there, how you can get involved being on the trail crew and being a part of the creation of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Both Paul and Tom have their own Instagrams and Facebooks that they're regularly updating. Transcaucasian Trail also has its own Instagram. There's several NGOs that are involved that post a lot of pictures from the trail as well. There's Hike Armenia, which we discussed earlier,
Right.
as well as Barev Trails is another one. Trails for Change is another one. Trails for Change is actively involved with trying to make reparations with Azerbaijan via Karabakh, Artsakh. So they're trying to build a bridge, a corridor between the different cultures and stances going on out there, trying to find peace through trail work, basically.
Right.
So they're doing good work. There were a few others.
So you mentioned that you and some of the others who've hiked these trails extensively are from the U.S. or other countries, English-speaking countries. How is the language barrier?
It's difficult. It's definitely challenging. Armenia is very quickly trying to join the first world, and so especially in the bigger cities, Yerevan, and the same goes for Georgia, up in Tbilisi, Batumi, you will find a lot of English speakers. However, the lingua franca in the region is still Russian. So a lot of times when you're walking and somebody hollers at you, they'll holler in Armenian or Georgian or whatever dialect of the village they're from. And when you're like, I don't understand, I don't know, they'll usually try Russian after that.
Right.
And they'll ask if you speak Russian.
Yeah.
And so if you do know a little Russian, that'll get you by. Usually how it went for me was they'd ask in Armenian, no, or I'd say a little bit. I had a colloquial sheet that I'd carry with me in my pocket with all the really like basic phrases. So I had that to communicate in a very, very, very basic form. After that, they'd ask if I spoke Russian. I'd say no. And I would ask if they spoke English, and they would either say yes a little bit or no. And if no, then we'd start playing charades, and just start acting things out and drawing pictures and doing the whole gesture communication game without language.
So for someone who doesn't have a lot of experience in that sort of a circumstance, what would your advice be?
Make a sheet, take a sheet and get those basics down, especially the like, I don't speak, I don't understand, where is, how, it just like the real, make a list of 20 things, 20 real basic communication things. And there are websites that can help you with that.
Right.
that will lay that out for you. But make that list of 20, get to know those really well. And once you start getting to know those really well, you can start adding 5 or 10 words at a time to that apply, that you find that you keep using. Like I kept finding that I needed to explain that I was a hiker. So I needed to find out how to say I walk, I hike. So I added that to the list later on. So you'll find what you need as you go, kind of thing, and you can adjust and build your list as you go. But yeah, those real basics are key. The please and the thank you, the where, the how, the who, the what.
What was the most significant thing that you had that you're glad you had, that you took? Is there anything that stands out in your mind of, this might surprise you that I had it, but I'm glad I had it?
Well, a sweater.
Colder than you thought it might be?
Definitely colder than I thought it might be. It was warm at times, but especially when I got up to Georgia, I needed that sweater. I carried a very lightweight wool sweater, and it ended up becoming a gift for one of the people that made a big impact on me and helped me out a lot. And she really liked it, and it ended up being a gift that made a good connection between the two of us as well. So
right. What did you take that you would not bother to take again?
Probably my stove. I used it sometimes, but I didn't need it.
What style of stove was it?
On the Camino, and just a little Novia, I think is the brand. A little $30 canister stove, gas powered.
Did you have any trouble finding gas for it?
Surprisingly, no. Yeah, I was able to find gas for it, especially in Europe, in Western Europe. I'm sorry, France, Spain, and Switzerland. Right. It was easily accessible.
Yes.
Yerevan, I was able to find it. Tbilisi, I was able to find it. Mestia now has, because of the outdoor culture and the tourism that's coming up into Svaneti up there, they've got some outdoor gear shops up there. So was able to re-up on fuel up there as well.
Really? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you take that you did not have with you? Is there something you wished you had?
I think more gifts, honestly, things to give to villagers and others, because I mean, the hospitality, again, the people calling me in and giving what they had, which was so little, oftentimes so little, and sharing it with me. I was constantly wishing I could give them something as a gift in return.
Right.
I was traveling light, so I didn't have a lot to give. Right. If I were to go back, I would bring, I don't know, some trinkets, some of the like state quarters or something, just little things that would mean something.
Right.
To the people that take you in.
Are there any other safety or security or health concerns that we haven't mentioned?
I kind of touched on this lightly, but if you go to Artsakh, Karabakh, you have to be careful. It is still an actively disputed border. That's really the only safety issue that I can think of. The rest of it, I mean, I was hitchhiking at times too to get from point A to point B. Instant hitches, like you'd stick your thumb out, and within 5-10 minutes, most of the time, somebody'd pick you up.
Really?
If they didn't speak your language, they'd get you to where you needed to go. One of the girls from France who was doing work for stay with the TCT in Armenia, she went hitching on her own several times and never had a problem as a single young woman as well. So it's a safe region, and I also heard that Svaneti and some of those northern Georgian regions are still dangerous if you get into the wrong spots, but I was by myself the entire time out there and never felt unsafe. So right. I don't know if I was just lucky, if I'm speaking from a place of privilege right now, or just got lucky, but you don't really hear about much happening these days. So.
Right. What were the costs for the trip? And what are the variables in the cost? How can one control that? Are there expenditures that one might want to make?
Right. I'll speak specifically to Armenia and Georgia because the Camino and the rest of that trip was ridiculously expensive. Mm-hmm. Armenia and Georgia was very reasonable. Food was cheap, transportation was cheap, lodging was cheap. I ended up, I don't know if they're still doing this, but the first year when I was there, the first year that they had international volunteers working on the trail, they were charging us. I think it was $500 to be a part of it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's mostly for fundraising to get this thing going, and
Right.
to pay some of the local workers as well. So there was that expense, which was the biggest expense, I guess, besides the flights to getting there from anywhere in the Western world can be kind of expensive. Besides, I guess, Europe, if you can get to Europe for cheap, like Western Europe, France or Spain or Germany or anywhere, you could probably get to Armenia for a couple $100, I guess,
Really?
round trip. Yeah, I think 350, 360, something like that for a round trip ticket from Paris.
Uh-huh.
And I know that last year Yerevan's airport expanded, and they're getting more planes and more flights coming in, which
Mm-hmm.
might bring prices down. I would hope.
Well, right now we're in the COVID crisis, so we'll see what happens after this.
Yeah, it's kind of anybody's guess. So yeah, expenses were not that bad, honestly, especially compared to Western Europe. A little goes a long way. Not quite as good as like Southeast Asia, but still comparable.
Yeah. How do you fit all of this into your life? How do you find time to go hiking? If you're willing to say, how do you find a way to pay for it?
Sure. I'm a seasonal worker. I have been since I got out of college 10 years ago. And I live a very unconventional life. I don't have debt. I don't have a car. I don't have rent. I don't have any real like major life expenses. I don't have a girlfriend. Um, so like I keep my price of living very, very low so that when I'm working, almost all of it can be accumulated and put into savings. Most of the time when I am working seasonal jobs, I get employee housing, so I avoid high rent and pay dirt cheap to either live in employee dormitories, or I stack into a house with 5 or 10 other people, and make rent go down to $100-$200 a month kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So most times I'll work hard 2 or 3 jobs at a time for 6 to 8 months and make a few $1,000s, and then I'll take 6 to 8 months off and spend it all.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lifestyle that's definitely not for everybody. I don't have a retirement plan. I don't have a savings account that is there for emergencies or a house when I'm old. I guess I've kind of figured I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I don't know. People told me when I was young to live while you're young and do all the things you want to do while you have the time and your body is able to do it.
Yep.
And I took that very literally, and I'm running with it. I want to get all these things done before my body starts shutting down, and before the world starts shutting down, and before these beautiful places change, irreparably. So I'm trying to chase that dream as much as I can by making the sacrifices of especially stability.
Right. Do you have any solutions for healthcare that the rest of us as Americans have not thought of?
Live a healthy life, make good choices, eat well.
Right.
I pay attention as much as I can to what I'm eating and try and eat healthily most of the time. I guess when I'm on trail, that kind of changes because it's just caloric intake as much as possible. So I do make those sacrifices. But most of the time when I'm off season, I'm eating as healthy as I can. I get out as much as I can. I exercise as much as I can. I don't know. I guess that's the best advice I can give.
Yep.
Don't get in cars very often.
What are your favorite information sources? Podcasts, blogs, magazines? Where do you get your ideas for this kind of thing?
Really, the ideas come from other hikers. I find out about 90% of the trails I want to hike from other hikers. Just word of mouth, people saying, "Hey, have you heard of the Vietnamerica?" No. What's that all about? Well, it's this crazy place out in Europe. They've got all these things, and the GRs, and oh, have you heard about the Hayduke Trail? No. Yeah. Okay. Sign me up. So it's conversation with other hikers that have heard about it. I do pay attention to some of the podcasts, particularly the Trail Show, because they're trail nerds and
Mm-hmm.
they talk about just all the stuff, not just the trails, but they're goofballs as well. So that's fun. Gut Hook has its podcasts, and besides that, I do kind of pay loose attention to things like the Trek and Outside Magazine. Definitely, when friends share an article that seems interesting, I'll pick up on it and read it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't go out of my way for it, but I do try and stay in the loop when it comes to information about trail, especially in this age when trails are getting shut down and reopening and things are happening beyond our control. It's nice to have sources to be in the loop.
Mm-hmm. Of the trails that you have completed, do you have a favorite?
That's hard. Everyone has its particular
Okay.
pluses and sides of things, but yeah, I gotta say that Pacific Northwest Trail honestly is up there.
Yeah.
I ended up doing it end to end, and then almost started on I started on a yo-yo, and then the weather window shut on me, so I didn't
Right.
end up doing the entire yo-yo. But I'm going back out this summer to do trail crew out there. I just the way that it passes through range after range after range, it felt like the old trails. Just the amount of hikers and the excitement from the communities around the trail felt like the young days of any of the big three are too crowded. There's just too many people, and it's getting to the point where it's kind of ruining the beauty of the community
Right.
side of it. So the PNT still has that. And yeah, you go from Glacier National Park to the Olympic Peninsula and the Olympic National Park, and all points in between are spectacular, with the exception of the road walks, which they're working on. And there is a fair amount of road walking on that trail, but the trail itself, and especially through the parks, is incomparable. It's just outstanding.
Great. And apart from doing that again, is there a trail that you are dreaming of doing?
Yeah. There's a few on the list. I had the plans this summer or this spring to do the Arizona Trail and the Hayduke Trail.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to connect the two and do the Arizona Trail first, and then get up on the Hayduke Trail, which goes through 9 of the national parks in Utah and goes through the Utah backcountry. And it's more of a route than a trail. There's no gut hook for it. There's very few people that are doing it, and there's no real trail set up. It's wayfinding. It's they say it's the most challenging trail we have in the States at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so that one's high on the list. The North Country Trail goes through my backyard here in Western New York, and that's a dream as well. It being the longest of the National Scenic Trails, goes from the border of New York, Vermont, all the way out to North Dakota, like the middle of North Dakota. It's
Right.
about 4,000 miles in total. So that one's in my sights as well. There's some international trails I'd like to get after as well. The GR20, some of the long distance trails up in Scandinavia. I'd like to get down to Patagonia and do what they've built down there, the 1,700 miles of trail through the South American Andes. Would be a dream come true as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, lots to do still.
Yes. What is the best way for listeners to find out more about your adventures?
Well, probably the Instagram is the best way to go. It's dill.on.dice, DICE. So that's probably the best way. I've got a Facebook too. It's Jack and the Green, but the Instagram has more pictures and better stories involved. I do not keep a blog. I keep a handwritten journal and hope to publish someday down the road, but that's going to be down the road still.
How did you get your trail name?
Good question. It was on the Pacific Crest Trail. I was probably 3 or 4 days in Southern California, and there was a guy up ahead of me who apparently kept looking back and seeing me making miles on him. It looked to him like I was catching up with him, and then he'd look back and I would be nowhere to be found, and then he'd look back and I'd be on his tail again, and then he'd look back, and then I'd be sitting on a rock just hanging out, and then somehow I got in front of him without actually like passing him on the
Yep.
trail. So he was seeing me out in front of him, and then later on in the day I was behind him again, and we ended up at the same camp, and he was a South African guy, and he's like, "Oh, you were so enigmatic, man." And I was like, "Oh, well, I guess it's Enigma is the name." He marked it. He
Yep.
told me I was enigmatic, an enigma in several sentences, and it just stuck.
I remember being warned about the dogs that the shepherds had in the Caucasus.
Oh yeah, they're big old dogs.
Talk to me.
They're big, fluffy guard dogs. I forget the species name. I wish my sister was around.
Caucasian shepherds. Caucasian shepherds.
They're the size of Pyrenees, but they look more like Saint Bernards almost.
Yeah, Kafkas.
Kafkas, that might be it.
Yeah. Which is just Caucasian in Russian.
They act like the Pyrenees too. They're very, very possessive of their territory. So their bark, and they're big, and I came across several, but as soon as they start barking, the shepherd would oftentimes be nearby, and he'd call them off. And they're very obedient as well. So they're smart dogs.
Huh.
So as soon as the shepherd whistled or called them off, they'd stop barking at me and leave me alone.
Yeah.
A couple of scares, but God, am I glad that the shepherds were around.
Yeah. Have you had experience with that kind of thing in other hiking?
Not much, luckily. I'm not a dog person, so yeah, it's I try and avoid them, but luckily it never really has been much of an issue for me.
Yeah, you did not list that under security issues or whatever.
Right.
Any other animal issues to discuss? Bears and that kind of thing?
There are specific large animals that are only found in the Caucasus regions. There's a leopard up there, very skittish and reclusive. You're extremely lucky to see one. Never saw a sign. There are Asiatic bears. I saw signs, but never saw one itself. Other friends did see them, but I never got to see one. There's a goat, the Bezoar goat, that kind of looks like an ibex. It's got the super, super long pronghorns.
Mm-hmm.
Those are up there. There are some species of snakes, but besides all that,
not too bad.
Not too bad. Yeah.
Great. Well, it's getting on in time, and I really appreciate your doing this interview with me.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Getting the chance to talk about it. Please, listeners, check out their website and transcaucasiantrail.org and any of the NGOs I mentioned, Hike Armenia, Barev, Trails for Change. They're all great organizations and really, really wonderful people making trail culture happen in the Caucasus. They're really, really excited about it. So they're excited to get outdoor tourism happening out there.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Trails Around the World podcast. Please visit us online at trailsaroundtheworld.com, and please join our Facebook group under the same name. If you liked this podcast, please help us out by leaving a review on your favorite podcast source, such as Apple Podcasts. This is Sky King, and I look forward to you joining us next time. In the meantime, happy trails to you, and please remember to leave no trace as you enjoy the outdoors.